Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. In this tutorial, I'll show you the basics of negative watercoloring. In negative painting, shapes are defined by painting around them or painting outside the lines. I'm going to use a stamped background image, and I chose this one because it has a lot of overlapping shapes. This technique also works well with landscape images or other images from nature. You'll see it done with leaves a lot. You can also use your own sketch or trace a stencil or a die cut to create some shapes that overlap, and they can be lines or geometric shapes. They don't have to be organic ones. If you're stamping, make sure that your ink is compatible with watercolor, since that's what we'll be using today. I used VersaFine ink here for my image. Here's a quick tip. To keep your watercolor paper from warping, you can either spritz or brush the back side of the panel with water, and that will counteract the curve on the other side. I'm going to start by doing a clean wash of water over my full panel, and I'm using 140-pound Fabriano Studio hot press paper here. Once I have a full wash, I'm going to drop some diluted color onto my panel while it's still wet. And the purpose of this step is to create a light base layer of color that will actually become the highlight color, as well as the underpainting for the image or scene. I just have flowers here, but if you're working with a scene that has distinct color areas, you can incorporate those colors in now. For example, if there were leaves in my image, I would drop some light green into those areas. Or if I was doing a landscape, I could have some green in a grassy area and blue in the sky area. The wash of water we laid down first allows those colors to bleed and blend without hard lines or outlines. We will add those later with our negative painting technique. I'm going to use my heat gun to dry this layer, and for this technique you do need the panel to be dry before you add the next layer of paint, so I may not show that every time, but it is important. I wanted to talk quickly about color choice. You're going to work from light to dark, and you'll also be layering colors, so you'll want to be sure that you're not creating mud as you build up your layers. To keep it simple, you might want to choose analogous colors, which are next to each other on the color wheel here, or keep your colors either all warm or all cool until you add in your shadows. You can also stick with just one color of paint and just increase the concentration with subsequent layers. You will probably want to avoid using colors across from each other on the color wheel, except maybe in your darkest layers. For this technique, we're going to work from foreground to background, so you'll want to determine on your panel which areas are in the foreground, and those are the ones you'll want to be most prominent. I've got 3 roses here that don't have anything overlapping them, so in my next layer, I'm going to paint their negative space. Basically, I'm going to leave them alone. They will remain in my base color, and everything else will take a step back because I'm making it darker. And hopefully you'll see that when I'm done with this layer. So I've chosen 3 roses, and I'm coloring outside their outlines. I've added a pretty even layer of color here. You can also blend out from the outline so the color is most concentrated at the outline and fades out as it gets further away. And that decision will depend on the image that you're painting. Here I'm filling the entire panel, so I'm keeping it pretty even, and I'll share some other samples in the gallery with some variations. That layer of paint is dry, and I'm going to select a few more roses that will be directly behind these ones in the foreground, and I'm going to paint around those as well as the first ones that I avoided before. And I'm using the same paint that I used on the first layer, just a little more concentrated than before. When that layer is dry, I will repeat the same process again, and you can add as many layers as you see. I could actually have done one more layer here, but in this layer I'm just using purple to fill in the spaces in between the roses that are left. So you can see how these small areas between the larger roses give definition to their shapes, not because I'm painting the roses, but because I'm painting the space around them. And that is the wonder of the negative painting technique. And of course you could paint this image traditionally by filling in each rose, and that would be a beautiful look too. This just gives a different look and gives more versatility to the images you already have. And it's fun to learn a new technique. When you are satisfied with the depth of your layers, you can go back on the dried panel and fill in some details or add shading. Here I'm just adding a few loose shadows around the petals of each rose. To shade the lightest roses, I'm using the color I used for the following layer, and so on. And you can do that, or you just use the same paint that you used on that layer with a little less water so the color's a little more concentrated. Where the images overlap, you can also add in shadows, and this is another negative painting application that really makes the layers pop. Some of these roses actually look like they're floating over the others, which I think is really cool. For these shadows, I use the same purple as that darkest layer, with a little more water on the lighter areas for a lighter shade, and a little less water in the purple areas for more concentration. Someone will ask if inks can be used for this technique. And if that's what you have, go ahead and test them first. But most dye inks won't layer well in this kind of technique because water or another layer of paint will cause them either to lighten or to lift. The paints that I'm using here are Core watercolors, QOR, and you don't need that brand to do this technique, but you will need paints that are permanent and transparent to get really good results with this technique. Here's my completed card, and then I have another one that I did with the same stamp in different colors. And then this was another practice piece I did, and I just used the edges of die cuts to create a little landscape scene. I traced the edges of the cityscape and the mountain, and then I did a wash across the panel in general areas. So I've got blue at the top, and purple for the mountains, and brown for the buildings, blue at the bottom. And then I did my negative painting from the bottom to the top, following the edge of each line. So there are lots of ways to use this technique, and I will share more in the gallery, and I thank you so much for watching.